Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have full review of the Xiaomi Redmi Note 13. Let's get started. This is the 4G edition of this device, which is the basic of this whole Redmi Note series, which has a lot of members. So this is the base model. In Mexico, I must anticipate that the launch price is exaggeratedly high, 6,799 pesos, which is approximately $395. If you are from another country, it is highly probable that this price will seem exorbitant to you, and from Mexico it seems to me a very high price. I would not recommend you to buy it for this price at all. The most recommendable thing to do is to buy it at lower prices, and it is probable that you will find it in some distributors at a lower price. In fact, it is curious because at this price it could compete head-to-head with the Poco X6 Pro, which is much better than this. Then why I insist that the most advisable will be to acquire another device at this price or this device at a much lower price. Xiaomi has decided to give a very widespread distribution to this device in Mexico, so you can find it in many stores, both online and physical, as well as phone companies. So it is going to be very easy to find, but the official distributors are likely to have a very high price. Once we cleared all this up, let's get to know it point by point. The design on the front is what we would expect, a device with considerably thin bezels on both the sides and the top, although the bottom bezel is slightly thicker, but it's still a considerably attractive design in this regard. It also comes protected with Gorilla Glass 3, so throughout the video you will hear me tell you that for the launch price in Mexico it is not recommended, but if you find it at a lower price it could be a good option. On the side we find volume buttons and on-off button. On the top is a microphone, also infrared to function as a universal remote control, a secondary audio output and the headphone jack. At the bottom is the tray to place the nano SIM card. In this case, the back of the tray will also allow you to place another nano SIM card or a micro SD card. You must decide for one of the two. Although in Mexico, if you buy it with Telcel, it is likely that this tray is blocked. The USB-C port is also placed at the bottom, as well as the microphone and the main speaker. The left side is completely clean, and this device has a thickness of 7.97 millimeters, so it can be considered a slim device. Its construction is mainly plastic. The back cover, as you realize, has a lot of reflections, plus it's going to smudge a lot with your fingerprints, so it's not such an attractive design in this regard. I have the stellar black color, but it's also available in mint green and ice blue color. And finally, in terms of ruggedness, it has an IP level of water resistance, so it resists splashes, and possibly, if it falls into shallow water, it can survive. So I think it has enough to compete at a much lower price point, but in the price range of the Mexico launch, it may fall well short. The screen will also have a good quality as it offers us AMOLED technology, and therefore we have intense colors and high contrasts. With regard to the rest of its specifications, its size is 6.67 inches with a full HD plus resolution, reaching a density of 394 pixels per inch. So it has a good level of detail, offering good sharpness in this type of content, and also in text with small sizes. So it is a screen that can really deliver good quality. In fact, its highest peak brightness is 1800 nits, obviously displaying HDR content, so it is able to give us a good quality. It also has good viewing angles, so as you can see, even watching these contents from the side, we will still maintain a good display. The higher brightness is comfortable for using this device outdoors, and the minimum brightness is also going to be comfortable for using the device at night. Although it doesn't have a higher dimming mode in the accessibility options, but it does have a sunlight mode for those times when you're outdoors and want the best viewing. In addition, it also has different color palettes where we can choose different color calibration styles to be very specific in your taste. And Xiaomi's reading mode, can become very advanced, as it is not only a color filter, but also within the classic mode it allows you to add some level of texture to the screen to have a more comfortable viewing as well. Finally, it is a screen that reaches about 20 Hz in its refresh rate, so the movements are quite fluid on it. So it is a screen that definitely lives up to what we could ask of it. Fortunately, it does have stereo sound, so not only does it have a speaker on the bottom, but the top has other audio outputs as well. One of them is placed in the frame area and the other in the earpiece area for calls. So it does have stereo sound, although the bottom speaker will be the one that will have the most bass frequencies, so the device does get to give a good sound within what we could expect. What strikes me the most is that it has a lot of volume, so it is a speaker that you could get to enjoy in this price range. Next, let's listen to a test, although it's not the same as listening to it live. Fortunately, in the sound software we're also going to find Dolby Atmos and Xiaomi sound available, but what I like most is that a 10-band graphic equalizer is available, even without headphones plugged in. So from my point of view, you could better customize the audio to specifically achieve your tastes. So I personally would prefer an equalization of this style to be able to have a better quality. So it's a good thing that it does give us access to a graphic equalizer. Also remember that this model still has a headphone jack, so it would be a good option. But if you want to use wireless headphones, it also has support for aptX and aptX adaptive codec to have a good audio resolution, although it is not the highest, but at this price is fine. Below you will hear an audio test recorded with the microphones of this device.
Esta es una grabación de audio hecha con el Xiaomi Redmi Note 13.
The microphones are not bad quality, but I don't think they have as much definition as I would have liked. Next, you will see a video recorded with this device, setting the sound system in my living room at maximum volume to see how it behaves in those environments. And again, the microphones confirm that they are not very sharp, but fortunately you don't feel any significant distortion in these high volume conditions. The front camera is 16 megapixels with f2.4 aperture and fixed focus, something that Xiaomi uses in practically all its devices. And in this case, we have a quick open mode by pressing the volume down button twice, but the device must be locked for that gesture to work. That is, if you are in any other application and want to quickly open the camera, there is no compatible gesture, so you must necessarily exit and then press the camera button. Then I think in that sense could improve. Regarding the experience taking multiple photos, note that the device remains sufficiently fluid. It does not seem to freeze at any time, although it does not have burst in this front mode. In the lower right corner, we are going to appreciate the beauty mode, which only has one parameter, curiously unlike other Xiaomi devices that have many parameters. On the other hand, it also has filters that we cannot preview simultaneously, but one by one. And in the settings, you can activate the special shot so that it detects the palm of your hand to be able to take this kind of pictures. Also in the settings, you can select that you want to touch any area of the screen to make photos a little easier when the shutter is a little far away. Even though this picture is 16 megapixels, I actually feel that the level of detail is much lower. It looks more like a 4 megapixel photograph with interpolated pixels because the specific resolution is 16 megapixels. But this detail definitely does not match that resolution, so please consider that the camera is 4 megapixels. So the level of detail is very simple. The colors are also simple but acceptable. If you're close to the camera, it still maintains good focus so you can see enough level of detail, but I insist that it's not very high. And with the arm outstretched, I think you would achieve good enough group shots, and again, the focus seems to be good. In backlit conditions, the preview doesn't look optimized because there are areas that look completely burned out, but after processing, I think it does manage to have a good balance of highlights and shadows. So in this sense, we do have a good picture. In interiors, it is a camera that gives us a barely acceptable detail, but there is much more noise, and in the darker areas there is even less detail, so it's a very simple photograph. And at night you notice that again it is very noticeable that it is a camera of a simple level because we do not have a good level of detail. A little bit of noise appears, although it seems to control it a little bit better in the darker areas where I thought I would notice even more noise. And in the more difficult areas of night photography, backlighting definitely doesn't do a good job. Look at the amount of noise it generates in the darker areas despite illuminating the face with its screen. In fact, curiously, if you have the flash off the picture, comes out a little better but still not something very remarkable. It doesn't have night mode for the front camera, so it doesn't seem to be very good in this aspect. Night portraits are also going to come out with quite a bit of noise and poor definition. And in the day you'll notice that it also fails to balance highlights and shadows well. It fails to focus on objects in the foreground, so it's a pretty plain portrait. On the back, the photographic system will be composed of the 15mm ultra-wide camera with 8 megapixels in its sensor and f2.2 aperture, in addition to fixed focus. Then we will find the 24mm camera, considered as the main camera with 108 megapixels on its sensor with an aperture of f1.75, and autofocus, although without optical stabilization. And finally, we have the 2 megapixel macro camera with f2.4 aperture. Much simpler, so the photographic system looks simple. Next, I'll try to capture number 3 to see how fast this device can become responsive. I'm going to make several attempts. On my second attempt, I'll be looking at real life, and on my third attempt, I'll look through the screen since you notice it has a significant delay in the preview. So let's see how he does. And as you notice, it seems to have some sort of buffering as the capture does it even before I've pressed the button. And notice that with respect to the burst, you can slide to the right and it takes 20 pictures. So it's a very fast burst even though it takes almost a quarter of a second to start. And it has a 20 picture limit, which may be too short for some people. Again, we're going to find the beauty and color filter options just like on the front camera. And if you tap on the screen, you can adjust the exposure and focus. But if you want to move more advanced parameters, you can go to the Pro mode, and in this case, we are going to be able to move the white balance, also the focus, the shutter speed, which can go up to 30 seconds, and the ISO, which can go up to 6400, in addition to exposure compensation, and as you can see, there is a histogram available. It allows you to take 108 megapixel photographs in Pro mode, but it does not have RAW photography mode for the more expert photographers. If you have enabled the artificial intelligence camera mode, you can get to have an automatic detection of your documents, or at least this suggestion to enter the document mode, where it will finally make the trimming of the edges of these sheets. And in this case, something important is that you can access to edit this document to apply some color filters and not just look like a cropped photograph, but really look like a scan. Although as you can see, it takes a long time to apply all these styles, but waiting a short moment, you can finally apply these effects, as I say, to make it look much more advanced. Although the result is in a JPG image, however, you can get to export if you press the print button in a PDF document. And also from the main camera interface is available QR code scanning with a button that appears very small on the right side. The high resolution mode of this device gives us 108 megapixel pictures, and there is a high enough detail, but I find that the sharpness looks exaggerated. You definitely get to notice these lines or this outline that make the result look unnatural. In fact, if we go to the maximum, you can see the pixels too much, so I don't think it's a very good quality, even though it does give you 108 megapixel pictures. Look at the more distant objects as they don't look natural at all, so I didn't like the result very much. With the automatic mode, the pictures are 12 megapixels, they look much more natural, the color is good. We also have a good exposure, so I think the pictures with the main camera come out well, although there is chromatic aberration present on the edges, so it's not a very high quality lens, but the pictures, I think, generally speaking, come out well. The ultra-wide camera will have even more chromatic aberration and distortions at the edges, generating a pink feeling at times. It is definitely not a high quality lens, but I think it still manages to maintain an acceptable picture in the area that matters most, which is the center. 2x zoom photography doesn't quite maintain optical quality, although it's still a good result. While the photograph with zoom 3x does manage to maintain optical quality, so curiously the photograph with zoom 3x looks sharper than the photograph with zoom 2x. The result is undoubtedly good. In this case, the result is much better compared to what was offered by the 108 megapixel mode. Motion pictures come out well with both the ultra-wide camera and the main camera. In the case of indoor pictures, the ultra-wide camera manages to have good lighting, although it does not have as much detail. The best thing to do is to take pictures with the main camera, which increases the level of detail and has good colors and contrast. Although if you go to zoom, you will notice again that in zoom 2x it does not have optical quality, although the result is still nice. And in this specific case, at 3x it doesn't seem to maintain optical quality. It feels like a simpler result compared to what it offered us outdoors. In backlight, the preview does not look optimized. There are some overexposed and burnt areas, although it does have HDR. Then, after taking the picture, we have a better balanced result. The areas are not too burnt, although slightly overexposed, but the balance is good between highlights and shadows. So in this type of photography, I think I did like the result. With the ultra-wide camera, the result is inferior because the shadow area does not manage to recover as much illumination, and in these areas it is normal that chromatic aberration is revealed much more, so it is not so advisable to take pictures with this lens in this kind of conditions. At night, the ultra-wide camera will look basic, it fails to balance well the brighter areas present, and the darker areas will appear poorly defined. So it's definitely not a good level of photography. Plus, you can't use it in night mode. With the main camera, the result is slightly superior, although there is still quite a bit of noise present in the darker areas and it still can't balance the brighter areas well. But if you use the night mode, the photo improves a lot, it comes out much cleaner without too much noise and with a better balance of lights and shadows. So the ideal in this device is to use the night mode. And it is curious that it lets us use the night mode with the zoom 2x, although the photos look very similar with and without night mode. And in night shots where there is no light source present, the result with the ultra-wide camera again looks very plain. But the main camera improves a lot in terms of light capture, although not so much in color accuracy, plus there is still noise present. Even in this type of scenario with night mode, the result is worse. Note how the darker areas appear with too many artifacts, a very ugly result with little definition, in addition to the ugly color it has. Interestingly, with the 2x zoom in these scenarios, the picture came out better. Although if you use the night mode, it again seems to make it worse. So, night photography can be a bit variable in its outcome. I wish they would improve it with an update because at the moment it doesn't seem like a very remarkable camera to me. Regarding the maximum zoom, I think the device does a good job. I already mentioned that at zoom 3x is where you're going to find optical quality, and this is possibly the highlight of the device as a strong point because it does have a good result there. And even if you go up to zoom 5x or 10x, which would be the maximum, still the result is nice. So zoom, I think, does take advantage of the 108 megapixel sensor that it has. And for macro photography with the main camera, you can't get very close, so you have to be far away and it's difficult to have an even focus. So the ideal is to apply a little bit of digital zoom, and definitely the result improves a lot. The macro pictures you could achieve are of good quality if you use the 2 or 3x's. And now look at the result we get with the macro camera. It's lousy, it has low saturation, low level of detail, so I don't like that camera at all. The panorama mode, you see that it does have high resolution, so it's very good in terms of the quality that it can give you, although there are some areas where you can see the merging of one and the other photograph. So it's not perfect, but I think it's very nice if you don't want to use the ultra-wide camera, which, as I said, generated a lot of chromatic aberration. And finally, the portrait photography appears to be good, though not excellent. What I like about this photograph is that it does keep the foreground in focus, and that's a good thing. The edge detection also seems to have a good level of accuracy, but the most illuminated areas become burned or overexposed, and that makes the photo does not look so good, plus it does not allow us to zoom. It would be ideal if it would let us take portraits with the 3x zoom setting, which we saw that it maintains good detail, but it is not available on this device. For video recording, it does not have anything very advanced, since its maximum resolution is full HD, nor does it have filters or any other special option, and when recording you will notice that there are no quick zoom shortcuts, but only a slider, and we confirm that it is not possible to switch to the ultra-wide camera if you have already started recording. In addition, we will be able to pause and resume the content. We can also take pictures while we are recording, but we can't rotate to the front camera, nor turn on the flashlight if we already started our recording. So it is quite limited in video recording options. The video recording is very basic and honestly looks a little strange at times. I don't think it's a device that's going to stand out much in this aspect. The colors are slightly pale, and even though it is at 30 frames per second, when there is movement you can get a bit of a weird feeling. The ultra-wide camera records very similar in terms of color, and curiously I like the result it gets. Unlike other ultra-wide cameras that in video recording drop a lot of level, in fact indoors it manages to control noise in a sufficiently remarkable way. It is true that it is still a bit noticeable, but it seems to me that it does excel in this aspect. Curiously, the main camera improves in terms of color and contrast, although it still maintains a bit of noise. But what caught my attention the most was that the preview when recording showed much more noise. So don't be disappointed if it looks a little weird when recording, because afterwards the result is much cleaner and with better contrast. In backlighting it manages to do a good job of balancing light and shadow well enough, although at times there are aggressive jumps in the exposure, but then it balances out again. So the result seems a bit strange to me if there is a lot of movement, but if you don't move too much, I think it can be positive. With the ultra-wide camera it doesn't seem to detect the face, so the result is much more stable in the lighting, but the face can be a little darker than we would like. At night, the ultra-wide camera suffers too much. There is a lot of noise, and this causes the level of detail and sharpness to be lost quite a bit. It even fails to balance the brighter areas, and the darker areas become too dark. Therefore, it is not recommended to record with this lens. It is advisable to record with the main camera, although it will also have a lot of noise present. Again, it fails to balance the highlights and shadows well. And in darker areas, even though it manages to have better light capture compared to the ultra-wide camera, the color doesn't seem to be very accurate, so all video recording is straightforward on this device. The stabilization is light, so if you're walking carefully, you might be able to disguise these movements well, but if you're running, the vibrations can be much more noticeable, so it's not so recommended for action scenes. The ultra-wide camera might have a better quality in that sense, because having more amplitude, the movements can go a little more unnoticed, so you can still get a good result. This device doesn't have a portrait recording mode, but it does integrate a fast camera mode that can go from 4x with stabilization, so it can be useful for recording people even in motion. Or it can go up to 1800x. So you can perfectly record movement of plants growing. So the result can be very good, albeit in full HD. The maximum zoom that this device achieves is 6x. Fortunately, the sliding is smooth, but you definitely see very little level of detail. So here, it doesn't seem to make good use of the 108 megapixel sensor it integrates. And if you start your recording with the ultra-wide camera, we're going to have a 2x maximum zoom, because this device is not capable of switching between the main camera and the ultra-wide camera if you've already started your recording. So again, we see very simple things in this section, and the slow motion is in HD at 120 frames per second. Simple, but it's appreciated that it's there. The front camera has a small level of stabilization, but you feel very strong compensating movements, so it gives a rather strange feeling. The colors again are going to be simple, so it's a recording that doesn't get to be too remarkable. Also, when backlit, we're going to appreciate that it doesn't quite balance highlights and shadows either, although this was something we could have expected. We could not be more demanding. It would be advisable to record with the light from the front and not from behind. And indoors, the feeling I get is of a very basic device, since especially the white balance is going to be changing in a very aggressive way. At times it gives more greenish colors, and at times more reddish colors, so I didn't like the result at all. Also, it has little contrast and little level of detail, and at night we are again going to appreciate a low level of detail. Fortunately, it seems to have a good noise reduction, although it is present, but it is not too noticeable. And in darker scenes, it does not seem to have a good light capture, but it was expected. In fact, the device illuminates its screen with more intensity to try to better illuminate your face, but it is not advanced enough. So for recording at night, it is not so recommended. With the front camera, you can't do fast or slow motion, nor does it have a dual recording mode, so it's simple in that aspect. This device comes with Hyper OS version 1.0.2, so It has the latest software from Xiaomi, and that's a nice thing. They give you a promise of 3 years of software updates and 4 years of security patches, so you also have a good backup that the device will be well supported after it is sold and won't go out of date quickly. In the customization, we will find the always-on display styles with different covers. The truth is that they look very nice, the different clocks that you can place, or also some graphic elements to customize your experience. In fact, in terms of customization, remember that the manufacturer now through HyperOS includes a fairly extensive customization on your lock screen. For example, it offers you different magazine styles or with different clock layouts. And it is also able to automatically recognize your photo to customize other sections. For example, we can customize this cover and see how we can choose some other picture or from the default images. In this case, I'll choose this picture and we're going to see that it automatically applies that effect to it, and it also has different filters that we can use to further customize the personalization experience on the lock screen. So this may be one of its most attractive points, because currently few manufacturers offer you this level of customization for the lock screen. In fact, through the theme center we can have a lot of customization not only for the lock screen but also for the icons and many other areas of the system. It also has some gestures to quickly access some functions such as the Google Assistant, or being able to take a screenshot by holding 3 fingers so you can specifically draw some figure on your screen, or slide 3 fingers down to take a full screenshot, and some other things like turning on the flashlight by double tapping the button. Personally, I would like this gesture more to open the camera, but they limit it only to the flashlight. In fact, in the shortcuts or gestures there is little customization because they don't let us choose specifically which app we want to open. And as you can see, it also has this sidebar from which we can open applications in a floating window mode. In this case, it allows us to open up to 2 apps at the same time in that mode, but if we want to open 3, note how it will replace them. In addition, we can resize and reposition them, and finally we will also be able to minimize them in the corner or on the side so you can work on other things while still having this window open. If you want to close it, just swipe from the bottom up. So it's a nice floating Windows mode, but it's worth noting that YouTube is not available, although Instagram is. Also remember that apps, you can open them in a split screen mode, so you can have 2 apps, and if you combine it with the split screen mode, you could have up to 4 apps running at the same time. By having in-display fingerprint reader, you can also use it to read your heart rate, something that's quite curious, but hey, it's available here. And remember that it has the My Remote application through which you can turn this device into a universal remote control, and that will always be very useful. And finally, note that this device in the artificial intelligence options of its photo editor does not have the sky replacement or the eraser of objects or people that other Xiaomi devices do have. So it comes with a slightly more limited experience in that regard. And the one-handed use mode is as iPhone very ugly, as it only scrolls the content from the top to in the middle, but the content on the other end is hard to reach if you have small hands. In addition to the fact that its optical engine is simple, so the vibration generated is not going to give you a response as premium as we see in other devices when interacting with various areas of the system. The fingerprint reader that is inside the screen is going to allow us up to 5 registrations, and as you realize, it has a good enough speed. It is not as fast as the readers that are outside the screen, but I think its performance will be good as long as you use a suitable mica, because remember that this is one of the main limitations regarding the compatibility with micas. But I think that the operation will be correct and not only serves to unlock your cell phone. Note that it has a shortcuts section, so if you keep your finger on this reader, observe how 3 shortcuts will appear, although unfortunately you cannot customize them. You will also be able to choose between different animations when unlocking with this sensor, and also has facial unlocking, although it is only in 2 dimensions, so as I always say, it is not so safe, it is simply comfortable and for convenience. Unfortunately, in this case, it doesn't have Google Extend Unlock, so you could keep your device unlocked in various secure environments. Instead, it only has this smart unlock connected to Xiaomi devices, but it's much more limited because it's only going to be compatible with Xiaomi watches. So that point for me is a bit weak. However, to automatically fill in forms and passwords if you are going to use Google services, but note how it does not make a verification before filling in the information, so by default it does not offer us a good level of security, although you can configure it so that it does request the fingerprint. Within the file manager we will also find a section of private files or secure folder, although it is quite hidden. To access, you must slide down this list a lot, and finally you can release to access your private folder. It does not have child mode, but perhaps you could use the second space for this, as each space has its own files and its own applications. It also has dual apps, so you can use two apps with different accounts if you see the need. And it also features app locking, so you can have a second security filter to ask for your fingerprint before accessing any app you want. In fact, within the security application, you will find some additional options, as the option to hide applications specifically from your home screen. In addition, you can also do a security scan to avoid any malware, although it is not in collaboration with any prestigious cybersecurity company, but it is only an analysis of Xiaomi. If you happen to lose your phone, in addition to the Google Find My Device feature, remember that Xiaomi integrates another feature, although it comes disabled for some strange reason. Then, you must enter the Xiaomi Cloud section to enable it, but for that you must also enable several necessary permissions, so it is a very strange configuration. From my point of view, all this should come enabled considering it's a Xiaomi device. So by enabling this option, you could have a better chance of finding your phone in case you happen to lose it. Also available are the digital wellness options to analyze the time you spend on certain application and even manage your children's devices with parental controls. And in the emergency options, you can add any contact or information in case of any emergency, and you can press the power button 5 times to launch an emergency call. The battery is 5000 milliamps, and in my test it performed as needed. I don't think it's something very remarkable, but it's not weak either. It meets within the average with the duration both in my foreground test and in my background test, so the battery leaves me well satisfied. It also has a normal power saving mode and also an even more intense power saving mode that could help you in times of emergency, so I think it is a good device in the battery aspect. Within the Ultra Saver mode, it lets you add 2 apps maximum as part of apps that you consider essential, so in this sense it is not as advanced as other devices that allow us to add 4 or more apps. You have to manage them well. And with respect to charging, a 33-watt charger is included in the box, and in my test with 15 minutes it charged up to 24%. With 30 minutes it charged up to 43%, and the full charge it finished in 108 minutes. So it doesn't seem to charge very fast. In fact, in the last part it gets extremely slow despite turning off smart charging. So I don't think that's a very noteworthy point. Fortunately, through software it has a battery protection option where you can choose whether you want normal charging or optimized charging, although it does not bring a specific charging lock for those people who need to always have their cell phone connected to the current. So I think the battery could suffer more degradation if you are this type of user. And even using the option to accelerate charging, the charging, believe me, it was just as slow. So it doesn't get to be very remarkable in this. This device still doesn't support 5G network, so that's possibly another of its weakest points. You'll have to settle for 4G. Also, obviously, it doesn't have eSIM support, although we wouldn't demand that for its price. In the security section, fortunately, it has a data usage manager, so you can perfectly select which applications will access the internet through your mobile data and which applications can do it only through Wi-Fi. So it can be useful to have a good control of your mobile data consumption. Regarding the Wi-Fi supports version 5, so it will offer us a simple download speed not too high as other devices, and also in Bluetooth connectivity comes with a slightly old version, specifically 5.1, so it will not offer the highest level of stability with your accessories. In fact, it does not have NFC, unlike many other devices that do allow you to make mobile payments, so this is also another weak point of the device. Fortunately though, if you have FM radio, you only need to have your headphones plugged in to be able to listen to it. It also has 2 modes of projecting the screen. The first one is called cast, and in this case, if it is an advanced projection, so you could project only an application or project with the screen off and even block notifications so they do not appear in the projection. Or you could also project in a mirrored format through the wireless display feature. What you can't do is project via cable, but you can connect to your car both wired and wirelessly. And lastly, with respect to the sensors, note that it does have accelerometer, also geomagnetic field sensor and gyroscope, in addition to the light sensor, but the proximity sensor is very strange. I had never seen a sensor of this style. Notice how it has more or less inverse pulses, but it seems that if it gets to work well, it does not seem to be a virtual sensor, so it was just a curious fact that the sensor is giving us this kind of signal. But it also has gravity sensor, linear acceleration and rotation vector. The Xiaomi ecosystem, we have already described it in other occasions as an ecosystem that has many devices, since you can even connect home devices of the Xiaomi brand. And remember that they offer us a huge catalog of devices including new TVs and other accessories. However, the interaction between the basic devices is not so advanced, although it does have a Xiaomi Pad, Xiaomi Smart Band, Xiaomi Watch and Buds. Actually, the interaction is not as good as we see in other operating systems. So I wouldn't say the ecosystem is a strong point unless your priority is accessories. But remember that the Xiaomi Home app can also be installed on other devices, not necessarily Xiaomi branded. So the number of devices in the Xiaomi ecosystem for me is not a factor in favor of this device. In fact, it is curious that Xiaomi gives more priority to Google Home within their quick settings list, probably because of some agreement they have with Google. So you can see that Xiaomi is currently very dependent on Google. Since, for example, they also shut down their own cloud to give prominence to Google Photos. So you don't feel that Xiaomi is very strong in this regard, but it looks very dependent on Google. Let's move on to the performance section. This device integrates the Snapdragon 685 processor, a processor that is a little better than the Snapdragon 680, but it does not have that much difference. It also integrates 8 GB of RAM with an additional 4 GB by default, although it can go up to another 8, but I see it unnecessary. It took 5.1 seconds on average to open each of these applications, confirming to us that the processor really doesn't seem to move very smoothly on this operating system. Maybe in other systems it can do better, because in conjunction with the RAM it doesn't seem to achieve anything very remarkable. In fact, the RAM is quite ample, so I can't find any explanation to which to assign this slowness. Even observe how we see that there are constant application restarts even with 8 GB, so it does not seem to have a performance worthy of this price. Definitely, this will be the point where you will get to suffer the most if you compare it with other alternatives, such as the Poco XS Pro that I told you at the beginning of the video, which will give you a much better performance. This performance is definitely not worthy of the launch price in Mexico, although if you find it at a much lower price, you could forgive this, as long as you use few applications open at the same time. For now, if you are one of those users who want to open many things at the same time and none of it restarts, this is definitely not the right choice. The storage of 256 GB is a strong and attractive point because it will allow you to store a lot of information on your device without getting full. So it could prove to be an attractive device for people who are going to use few applications but do want to store a lot of photos and videos. And speaking of video, let's test how long it takes to export several clips with a total duration of 1 minute, all of them recorded with this cell phone in full HD. As you can see, it took almost 40 seconds, so it shows us that this processor is not very powerful, since even in full HD video it was not able to export it in less than 30 seconds. For games, you know Xiaomi does weird things. You have to enter the security application to then open Game Turbo, which is actually named Game Space. So these are inconsistent things from Xiaomi that are preserved in this HyperOS system. From this manager, you can appreciate the games you have installed, plus the current battery and CPU and GPU consumption, but only from the manager, so it is not so useful. Although it is quite curious that at this moment the GPU is using 99% of its capacity, taking into account that we are not doing any action. In this case, the configuration is very limited, as it doesn't allow you to customize the performance as other Xiaomi devices do. And once you enter a game, notice how there are no additional tools. There is only the sidebar through which you can enter applications in a floating mode to answer any message, but it does not have a specific monitor, high performance mode, or additional tools that we do see in many other devices. The truth is that it disappoints quite a bit here. In Call of Duty, this device by default loads medium quality at an average frame rate. However, it does let us go up to very high graphics quality, although if we go up to the high frame rate per second, the graphics quality drops. So it is up to you as a user what you want to use. In this case, we will use the very high quality at a medium frame rate to see that it does have practically all the effects available, although not all of them can be used at the same time, but it is a good thing in terms of graphical compatibility. However, the performance doesn't seem to be that advanced. In fact, it looks a lot like the performance we achieved with the Snapdragon 680, which we didn't like too much in devices at this price point. Obviously, if the device were much cheaper, it might still be acceptable, but it's a performance that definitely leaves a lot to be desired. Without screen recording, it goes much smoother, but recording the screen, it's definitely a disaster. You can't get to play games this way, so if you want to record gameplays or more advanced stuff, another device is definitely going to give you better performance. In the case of Legends, we changed the automatic setting to a medium quality setting at 60 frames per second. And honestly, it even went so far as to crash the screen recording, suddenly stopping and restarting. The performance looks quite low. In this case, we couldn't specifically monitor the frames per second because of some bug in the system, so definitely the experience is not good. Without recording the screen, you do notice that it can reach 60 frames per second in this game with good stability, but at times of more explosions it can slow down considerably. So it is not a device focused on those who want to play games. Definitely the better choice if you want to play games would be the Poco XS Pro. On SpongeBob has the medium resolution and high quality by default at 60 frames per second, so we reduced the quality to have an acceptable test on this device. But it should be noted that it does not support special graphics smoothing, and again much of what we had seen is repeated. That is, without recording the screen you can get to have a relatively good experience in terms of gameplay. But recording the screen is a complete disaster. Even cheaper devices are going to give you better performance recording the screen in several of these games. So it confirms that this is an extremely bad device for gaming. I definitely wouldn't recommend it, even though it manages to maintain a considerably good temperature on all content. It practically never came to feel extremely hot, but against it the game performance goes very badly. And finally, Henshin Impact defaults the graphic details to low quality, so we kept them at that setting but went up to 60 frames per second to have a slightly more demanding test. And without recording the screen, again, it was quite smooth. In fact, it gave us a good gaming experience. In this case, we did get to play a little bit smoother. It's not unhindered, but it runs well. However, again, the problem comes if you try to record your screen, because definitely that experience is going to be pretty bad, so it's not a good option. In short, this device is not bad, however, everything will depend on its price. The launch price in Mexico seems to me completely exaggerated and out of place, because instead it will be much better to acquire the Poco X6 Pro that is practically at the same price and is better than this device in all sections. So hopefully Xiaomi will get their pricing act together, because Poco devices can be the biggest competition and threat to the Redmi devices. For now, this has been all for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can point it out. And see you next time.